Hi everyone, welcome to Thursday, April 23rd, Social Studies. Today we're going to be discussing African Americans in the Civil War. So what we're going to do first, which is something we're very familiar with, is a notice and wonder with a painting. Now over here you see a painting. This is a battle in the Civil War. So we're going to take a few seconds to sit here and list the objects, people, and actions that we see. Then we're going to ask ourselves, what are two questions that if I just look at this painting, what two questions do I have? Remember, there's no right or wrong answer during a notice and wonder. It's just meant to get your brain activated and thinking. So pause the video and see if you can come up with two questions that you have after looking at this painting, and what are some things you notice and see. After you do that, I'm going to write here a couple of things that I notice and see. When I look at this painting, something that I notice automatically is I notice two different flags. You see that there? There's one flag here and one flag here. I also notice different uniforms, and it looks like men are fighting. Down here, you can see a man in this color uniform fighting another man right here. And I noticed that there are African Americans all on this side and white all on this side. So there's African American soldiers, and then there are white soldiers. Those are some things that I noticed. Now, I'm going to just come up with one question that I automatically had when I looked at this painting, and it was, why are there two different flags, and why is that important in the painting? Why is it important that there are two different flags in this painting? All right, so think about some things that you might be wondering from there. So actually what you're seeing here is a painting of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment charging Confederate troops at Fort Wagner near Charleston, South Carolina. So this was an African American regiment, this group of soldiers right here, and they were charging the Confederate soldiers over here. Now remember, this is the Confederate flag. So these were the Southern Army. They were the South, and they did not want slavery to end. They wanted to keep slavery. So the African American freed slaves that were fighting in this regiment were fighting against them. They were representing the North. Now you probably noticed the two different flags, like we said, the weapons and the soldiers. Did you notice that all of the soldiers in blue are African Americans except for one soldier? The 54th Massachusetts Regiment was made up of African Americans except for their leader, who was white. So this man up here must be their leader, who is the white man here. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to read about the experiences of the African Americans during the Civil War. While you read, make sure you're annotating the text and taking some notes on a sheet of paper of some good things that African Americans experienced when fighting in the Civil War and some bad things. So some positives would be the good things. What are some things that they gained out of this? And then the negatives are things that weren't so good for them during this. So what I was going to do on my piece of paper, and you're going to pause here, I just have a little sticky note. I'm going to write a plus sign and a minus or a subtraction sign here. So this will be the positive things that they experienced, the plus sign, and then this would be the negative things that they experienced. Just take a few minutes to jot those down. All right. So I noticed some of the positive things were that they were actually the African Americans were able to be freed and they were able to fight. But I did notice some negatives, and it says here that African American soldiers were discriminated against. That even though the Union had moved to enlist African Americans, like they were allowed to fight, it didn't mean they treated them fairly. So that was a negative. So they were fighting for something they believed in, but they still weren't treated fairly. So what you're going to do at the very end, after you read this whole text, and you can listen to Miss C reading it, I posted a recording of that, read through and learn about the experiences of the African Americans during the war. Then you're going to answer this question. Was life better for African Americans who were able to fight in the Civil War? So you had your African Americans who might have been freed, or even if they were still slaves, how was their life different than African Americans who were actually able to fight in the war? Was their life better? You're going to argue your answer using evidence. So for example, if you said their life was not better, you might say, I know this because their life was not better because they were still discriminated against. They were still paid less, and they were still segregated. So just because they fought in the Civil War, maybe their life wasn't better. Make sure you include evidence from the text. Thanks for watching, guys.